You can't defame a dead person. I think Kevin is wrapped up to his eyeballs.
This was at least his second trip to Thailand in a year.
The main suspect dying unexpectedly wasn't sort of part of the equation.
One of his victims was very hesitant to believe that he was dead because she said he tells so many lies.
He was distracting and he was throwing up smoke bombs from day one. Somebody who can actually beat the system again and believe that he can beat the system again and again and again.
Welcome to the 8th update episode of Dear Rachelle, your behind-the-scenes access to this live podcast investigation series. I'm your host, Ashlea Hansen. As we reported in our last bonus episode, Kevin Steven Correll, the key suspect in the murder of Rachelle Childs, was found dead in Thailand on Friday the 18th of July 2025. A post-mortem confirmed he died from heart-related issues after suffering a cardiac arrest. His sudden death continues to raise questions about what this means for Rachelle's case, now that the key suspect is no longer alive. Joining me on this episode are two of my fellow journalists who've been working closely on this case, Patrick Carlyon, senior feature writer, and Charlotte Karp, senior reporter for News Corp. Thanks to you both for joining me today. Charlotte, I'll start with you. How did you react when you heard Kevin had died?
I was shocked. Like everybody else, I would say. My deputy editor had called me. It was a Sunday morning and I was not thinking about work. And she said, "Have you had a call from Ash?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And she said, "Well, I'll just tell you then, Kevin's dead." And I said, "What?" And I had to leave the room that I was in and have a call with her. But yeah, my first thought was, how did this happen? But yeah, the primary feeling was shock.
And Patrick, you?
Look, I think you texted me very early that morning, Ash. It was a Sunday morning a few Sundays ago. And I was sort of staring at the message going, what? This doesn't compute. Of all the possibilities throughout the podcast and the coverage and, you know, where it might go, the main suspect dying unexpectedly wasn't sort of part of the equation. I think shock certainly was the first impression. The second was relief, I think, for all those people, all those women in Kevin's past who were terrified by him. And I thought about Jazz, his daughter, and the vow that she made to you on the podcast that she wouldn't shed a tear until she'd spoken certainly to Christy and Rachelle's family about the fact that Kevin was no longer with us. And then after that, I started thinking, what the hell does this mean in terms of you can't prosecute a dead person? We've got so far with the evidence. We've pushed so many boundaries throughout this sort of exercise. Well, what does this actually mean for what we've been doing for so long?
You've had a few weeks now to consider that. And what do you think it means for Rachelle's case?
Obviously, when the main suspect dies, it makes the case and the question of the case difficult. One thing that struck me, and this struck me very early, is we still don't know the truth of what happened to Rachelle. We're all desperate to know it. We don't know what happened in her final 9 hours. Don't know whether there was one person involved or more than one person was involved in such a heinous crime. And these are questions that we've got out there. We've got so many leads. We've got so many things going on at the moment. It's quite possible, you know, I'm sure a lot of the listeners and the readers are sort of formed their own views on what happened and whether it was one person who was involved. But there's certainly a lot of people out there who must know something about this story that we don't know yet. And it's quite possible that more than one person was involved.
It is possible, and something that we're all still looking at as journalists that are actively still investigating Rachelle's case, even though the suspect has died. There are just so many unanswered questions, and I know we talk about it all the time, and getting those answers may be more difficult, but also on the positive side, for me, I know that I feel like if anyone was in fear of coming forward because of Kevin Correll, that fear now is gone. So I'm hopeful that might lead to somebody coming forward. What are your feelings on that, Charlotte?
I agree. I think that is a positive of all of this. When I found out that he had died, I felt sorry for the family in a way, because if he did kill Rachelle, then he'll never have to answer to that. He never, and until the very end, when he very much knew that the investigation had started again, his life was fine. You know, he got off rape charges and all sorts of things. You know, he just got to carry on with his life, and he will never have to answer difficult questions about what happened when Rachelle died and his actions and his uncorroborated alibi and all sorts of things like that.
Just on his alibi, let's pick up on that. What stood out to you as incriminating or suspicious about Kevin's alibi when you looked at it closely?
The fact that nobody could corroborate it for a start, the fact that he had said that he was getting fish and chips and he pretty much had the same order as he did when he got off another sexual assault case, that a co-worker had said he looked like shit the day after Rachelle died, that he never went out to look for her, and all of these things that were inconsistent with the way that he had behaved towards Rachelle, which was quite positive. I think she had called him like a father figure, and that doesn't come from somebody who ignores you, who wouldn't be concerned for your welfare. Also how he introduced her fingers possibly being cut off, and little things like his attitudes towards women, that he called one of his former victims, you know, a mole who was asking for it. Little things like that stack up and you start to think, well, yeah, it's very likely that you could have done this.
You do see a pattern of behaviour. And Patrick, from your perspective, what was some of the most suspicious evidence that linked Kevin, in your view, to Rachelle's murder?
Look, the crime that was committed against Rachelle, basically we ended up with 6 separate crime scenes. There was something very rehearsed in this. This was somebody who knew Rachelle and who went to great lengths to basically practice the carrying out of the crime. And I think if you look at Kevin, what always struck me was the evidence of his then girlfriend, who we called Alice. And she talked about the fact that Kevin had flagged on that Thursday night that Rachelle died, that he was going to go shopping to buy his son a birthday present. And she sort of said, as you would quite naturally, would you like me to come along? And he said, no, I want to do it by myself. And he reiterated that 2 or 3 times in the 3 or 4 days before Rachelle died. And if you look at the facts as we know them, Rachelle was found on fire more than 100 kilometres away from where her car was found near her home in Bargo. A stranger's not going to go to that amount of effort to kill somebody. It was somebody who knew Rachelle, and it's somebody who planned to do it. And even the Charlotte was saying he looked like shit the next day at work. But even, I think from the very next day, he was spreading rumours about the fact that it must have been a bike he hit, that her fingers had been cut off. He was distracting and he was throwing up smoke bombs from day one. That's not normal behaviour for somebody who is a friend, for somebody who cares. And just that lack of curiosity that Charlotte referred to, and his lack of interest in trying to find her, and the rehearsed elements that went into this very elaborate alibi, and the fact that we have disproven elements of that alibi through the podcast, are all critical things that add up together. You put it all together, it doesn't make sense that a bloke that probably raped women, who liked women and liked to hurt women, could be so close to somebody as lovely as Rachelle and not be involved and not be at all curious about this diabolical fate that awaited her. They worked together. They were very close. They spent a lot of time together, and he didn't like it. He became obsessed about elements of her lifestyle in a way that was very unhealthy at best. And you put all these things together, and it's like, hang on, this bloke's, or by default, has to be involved or has to know something.
I just want to add, for me personally, when you look at the evidence of Kevin in the days that followed Rachelle's murder, this is before the family were informed that Rachelle had died. Kevin wasn't helping, and that was just not in line with a boss, not in line with someone who had claimed to care about her and had taken her under his wing. And devil's advocate, though, let's look at it from another perspective, because someone said it to me, well, if you had Kevin's past, maybe you would be a little bit hesitant to get involved in a search for a missing woman. And I said, but hang on here, if you look at it from from the perspective of a boss and someone who cared about someone that was missing and their family and their father had turned to you, even with his background of having been accused of multiple sexual assaults, even if he was worried about that, the first instinct, you wouldn't go to something bad has happened to her in the sense of something criminal. Your mind would go to, like every other ordinary person that was desperate to find Rachelle, all of their minds went to she'd run off the road because she was a lead foot, she was a car nut, and she was known to speed. So that was where their minds were going to. So you got to wonder why, if Kevin wasn't involved in any way and he was innocent, then why was his mind going into protection mode? Why wasn't he trying to help find her, which was the normal thing to do in those circumstances? And just more so on the tears and how emotional he was, yet so cold. And I know that was Graham's description of him when he reached out and said that Rachelle's missing, we need your help. It must be serious. And even Alice said, gosh, this must be serious that Rachelle's father's reached out to you over the weekend and he's desperate to find her. Something must be wrong. And he was just dismissive and cold was Graham's words. So then to be crying after and going over to the Campbelltown car yard on the Monday and telling one of the managers over there that she'd been dealing with bikies and they think the bikies did it so early in the piece, I think really stood out to me. There are so many twists and turns in this case. Patrick, for you, what were some of the standout moments investigating Rachelle's murder?
Look, I think Kevin's alibi, really, was so elaborate, it was so detailed, and the fact that it had never been proven or disproven beggared belief. If the police had done a better job in the early days, we wouldn't be here, 24 years later talking about those details of the alibi. And I know both you and I, we spent hours and hours talking about this or that aspect of the alibi. How did he get to the fish and chip shop and why was he going there and why did he say Campbelltown? And if he was innocent, wouldn't there be something you could pin down to actually prove it? Where he got caught up, and it's taken 24 years, was on the phone, the digital phone technology, because we all have mobile phones. They all ping off towers. We never think about it. The fact there was the Razorback mountain range actually precluded his phone from pinging from one side to the other side. And where he'd said he'd been in Campbelltown early on that evening after leaving work, what we found, I discovered Matthew Sorrell actually, I was covering the mushroom cook trial down here in Melbourne. And Dr. Sorrell spent, I think, more than 2 days on the stand describing and explaining the technology that led him to believe that Erin Patterson was probably there at that time. And I thought, this is the man we need. This is the bloke we need to actually unpick Kevin's alibi. So I gave him a call and he was up for it. Within 5 minutes, he was very enthused, saying, what have you got? Send it to me. I need this and I need that. And we actually, I think it was from the brief of evidence, there was some phone mapping data that you had got and sent on to me. I sent that on to Matthew. And it took him about 10 minutes. He's come back. He's rung me back. He was in Adelaide. He's rung me back. Very excited. I can prove it. I can prove that he wasn't there at 6:08 p.m. He must have been south of the Razorback. Now, the police and the technology he was using is a lot better than the technology back in the early 2000s. But he basically proved within an hour that alibi couldn't have been correct. And I think that's a major breakthrough. If there had been something like that well before we got involved, it might have actually shifted the case in a massive way back in the early 2000s, and we wouldn't be here talking about it now.
Well, you're right, because that is objective evidence. It's not subjective. So, and it's hard evidence because it's the first time that we've been able to say, or an expert, a world-renowned expert has been able to say it's impossible that he said he was where he said. And also something that stands out to me and plays over in my mind as well is Dr. Sorrell continually said, that call just really bothers me. It just really bothers me because why was he so adamant that he was in Campbelltown? Why Campbelltown? And I've often wondered that. Charlotte, do you have any insights about that? Have you wondered why he was so adamant that he said he was in Campbelltown at 6:08, yet his phone pinged on the other side of the Razorback Mountain in the area of Rachelle's home, Bargo?
If I was to speculate, I'd say he came up with something quickly and he had to stick to it. You've said that you're in Campbelltown. You can't just change your evidence. That makes you look very, very guilty. So I would assume that he had to stick with what he'd said.
Have you thought about it, Patrick? What's your theory behind the 6:08 phone call?
There was so much detail in his where he said he went. I think he started at Campbelltown. I think it was sort of almost a safe place. It was like the starting point for his alibi. He had connections in Campbelltown. I think it was probably a safe launching pad for this inexplicable alibi that was then going to play out over the hour or so. And, I mean, we retraced his alibi that night. I sat in the car with Reese, the producer, and we actually retraced it minute by minute. The fact that it started in Campbelltown didn't make any sense. And Dr. Correll proves that he wasn't in Campbelltown. And it's just a great pity for me. It's just a tragedy that information couldn't have been forthcoming, decades before now.
What would you like to see happen now, Patrick?
Look, there's still so many facts that we don't know, Ash. I would like, if you look at the logistics of the night, I won't get too bogged down in the detail. I think if Kevin was responsible for Rachelle's death, I think he had help, just given the great distances that were travelled that night. I think somebody had to help him at the other end after it all happened, at the very least. And I think, and you talk to the Chris Ellingsworth, the profiler. She talked about the fact that it's very unlikely that someone commits a murder and doesn't tell a single soul any aspect about committing that murder over the next 24 years. There are people out there who know things. They might not know the whole story, but they know elements of the story that are critical to understand the facts of the last 9 hours of Rachelle's life. I would love to hear from those people. And as you say, that terror that some of them might feel from Kevin, that he would retaliate, that he would hurt them if they spoke up, has been removed. That is a silver lining to the fact of Kevin's death here. There is no reason not to tell the truth as we know it. And there are little details. You look at the phone pings. That looks like a very minor detail in a very big and elaborate story. You get a couple more of those little details come through, we might be able to make sense of what the hell happened.
For you, Charlotte, can you give us a bit of insights into your investigations into Kevin's connection to Thailand? I've just returned from Thailand and have been covering his death in Thailand, and we know that it was a medical episode. He had a lot of heart issues and went into cardiac arrest. But in terms of your work looking into Kevin's life in Thailand, can you shed some light on that, and what was he up to over there?
Well, Kevin seemed to like going to Thailand. As far as we know, this was at least his second trip to Thailand in a year. He used to have, he has an ex-girlfriend who lived sort of in the northern region. And she was much younger. I can't remember exactly how old she was, but she was, I think, in her 20s. And, he was 69. Whether he was there for sex tourism purposes, I don't really know. But to have at least two girlfriends in Thailand and to go there often, especially when you're being, accused of murder and rape and all sorts of things in a very public podcast that he definitely knew about and all of his friends and family knew about, and his own daughter was accusing him of murder. It just raises some questions about the sort of person that he was, his intentions, and his values in life, I would say.
Ash, can I just ask, what was it like in Thailand and what were you investigating and what did you find?
Well, there was a lot of confusion about the circumstances surrounding his death, and because we did highlight him so much in the podcast and we were taking a very serious interest in his life and his behaviour and any connection to Rachelle and Rachelle's case, looking at it so many years later, we felt that it was the right thing to do to go to Thailand and to investigate what happened over there and also talk to the people that he was close to over there. And being on the ground there in Thailand, it's a very chaotic place. It's super busy. The people are very friendly, and I was working with a translator. We refer to them as fixers, and she was very helpful and led me to the police, and we went and interviewed the police, and there were no suspicious circumstances surrounding Kevin's death. But when we went there, that hadn't been ruled out because a post-mortem had still to be conducted, and certainly one of his victims was very hesitant to believe that he was dead because she said he tells so many lies, I wouldn't put it past him to fake his own death. And that was a very real feeling that she had towards him because he, in her view, he got away with so much over the years, including raping her. So I think we just wanted to get to the bottom of it and also talk to the people over there and get a better understanding of his life in Thailand. Charlotte, what have the police said since Kevin's death? I know that you put some questions to New South Wales Police. What was their response?
That the investigation is ongoing, which is a typical response from police during an investigation. I wouldn't expect to hear much more from them until the investigation has concluded. But having said that, I do think it's important that they continue this investigation.
Yes, absolutely. I think that police keep up this investigation and at least follow up some of the people that we've spoken to in the last year and a half. I mean, I'm still stunned that they haven't gone back to Evelyn, who claims to have seen a Walkinshaw in Kevin's possession just over a year after Rachelle's murder. That has stunned me that they haven't gone back to her and taken a formal interview from her. I'd also love them to get in touch with Dr. Matthew Sorrell and get him to reevaluate some of the data and the phone data that police have that we didn't have. I'm sure they have a lot more. So that would be interesting. Look at the other evidence that came forward as well, like the newspaper clippings hidden under Kevin's carpet in his former Camden unit that used to overlook the Camden car yard, and how strange and suspicious that is to hold on and hang on to newspaper clippings about the murder of a colleague. You know, I can understand keeping them, but the secrecy and hiding them.
Look, I think Kevin was obsessed with Rachelle. I think there's plenty of circumstantial evidence, whether you're talking about the newspaper clippings, whether you're talking about the evidence of Alice, as we called her, at the coronial inquest. If you look at Fiona and other colleagues who talked about the way that Kevin would leer at Rachelle and the fact that he had these very strong judgments about what makeup she would wear and what clothes she would wear, which is just totally inappropriate for a work colleague. I think he was obsessed. I think he was absolutely obsessed. And the fact that he was so incurious after it happened does sort of suggest that some responsibility for what actually did take place. And that's what I don't understand. If he was totally innocent, you'd be saying to the police, look, I had nothing to do with this. Do what you have to do. Like, sort it out. I don't want to be in your sights. I had nothing to do with this. And that also goes to the spreading of stories straight after her body was found, that it must have been a bike he hit. That was just total nonsense. This was all part of a rehearsed set of events for Kevin, I think. The main suspect can't be sent to jail, obviously, at this point, but we still need to know the truth.
Absolutely. And also we need to know if somebody else was involved, if somebody else assisted in any way, or maybe it wasn't Kevin and there is someone else, a mystery person that is unidentifiable at this stage that may be involved. I mean, I think it's extremely unlikely, but we have to leave that door open as well.
Look, I think you can't defame a dead person. I think Kevin is wrapped up to this to his eyeballs, and I think his reactions and his responses from the day after Rachelle's body was found to when you confronted him earlier this year, they do speak of a guilty conscience to me. He set out to hurt Rachelle, certainly, and he managed to bluff his way through a police investigation and a review of that investigation and a coronial inquest in the same way he took the stand in 4 separate sexual attacks in the early 80s. He backed himself in. There's almost a cockiness. There's a belief that he could beat the system. And I think that's true in 1982 when he attacked a woman in Liverpool, in the same way as he took the stand at the coronial inquest and actually chose to answer some questions, knowing full well that he was involved in the death. That's an unusual character, isn't it? Somebody who can actually beat the system again and believe that he can beat the system again and again and again.
Yes, a very complex man and a person that we're still very much investigating and trying to figure out. As soon as we have any more answers, we'll be bringing them to our listeners. Thanks, Patrick and Charlotte.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ash.
The search for answers continues. If you have any information you want to share with me, Ashlea Hansen, you can do so confidentially. Please send an email to dearrochelle@news.com.au. Remember, eligible News Corp Australia digital subscribers get early access to breaking news and developments on Rachelle's case. To subscribe and learn more, go to dearrochelle.com.au.